Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 8th webinar of 2021. I'm really pleased to have with us this evening Usamah Faheem, who's sort of fellow Glaswegian. I'm not quite Glaswegian, but I did study there, so I'm part of the clan. So Usamah has done quite a bit of writing for the FSN magazine. He was also a student of the Integrative Sports Nutrition course, and he's been doing quite a lot of work with sleep over the last year or two, and playing with some fancy HRV kit as well. So I thought it would be a really nice topic for him to present on. Like always, what we'll do is we'll run with his presentation for like 40-45 minutes. If you get any questions during that time, just pop them up through the chat box. If there's any really pertinent to what he's talking about, I'll ask him. Otherwise, we'll get into a Q&A for the last 15 minutes. Just check out the chat box at the moment. Tell us where you're from, what you do, and what you'd like to learn from tonight. And also with videos, we like to see people, we like to have it quite interactive. So yeah, feel free to put your video on and show your face if you're brave enough. And I think the last thing to say before I hand over is Usamah is right now in the beautiful Isle of Skye, which is a cracking location with good whiskey, but his internet's not the greatest. So I've screen shared just to take the load off his internet. If he drops out, he's going to try and quickly come back on, and I'll just start fielding some questions during that time. Okay, right, over to you, Usamah.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Ian. So yeah, because of the Wi-Fi issues, I will be saying next please to Ian, so please disregard that. But just to get started then, Ian, next please. Unsure if it's moving over. It's just staying on the home screen for me.
Can anyone see the sleep cycle? Or is it doing as it did before? Yeah, sticking. Okay, it did that last time. Okay, let me just stop the share and start again. Okay, is it moving on?
That says no.
Okay, cool. Can you see?
Yep, that's lovely. But we can just go to the next screen, Ian. I'll just do the overview on the next screen.
Okay, the next slide.
Yeah, sorry, the next slide, please.
Okay, there you go.
Lovely. Yeah, so just to get started, I think a very foundational principle to understand is the actual sleep architecture. So by architecture, what I mean there is just how the different stages of sleep and what's actually happening to our bodies when we are sleeping. Historically, or probably still to this day, if you were to go out onto the street and ask a layperson how many hours of sleep should I be getting, you're probably going to get told 8 hours. And unfortunately, that's quite an arbitrary number. And it's where that number came from interests me a little bit as well. And I spent quite a lot of time researching to find the original origins. And as far back as I went was apparently in the 90s, there was a psychiatrist, Thomas Ware, if I'm correct. He basically done an experiment in which a group of people were plunged into darkness for 14 hours every day for a month. After a bit of time where the body had regulated, I think it was the 4th week, the subjects had finally settled into a normal sleeping pattern in this darkness. And what they found was that they slept for 4 hours, they then woke, had a 1 to 2 hour break, and fell asleep for another 4 hours. This is where that 8 hours actually came from back in the 90s. So we're now at a position where we know that 8 hours isn't exactly gospel, and sleep is very individual. There's 2 different groups within the sleep stages. You've got your non-REM, which is non-rapid eye movement, and that's your stages 1 to 4. And then you go into stage 5, which is your REM sleep. By understanding these stages at this stage, it helps us later down the line when we're looking at how to boost athletic performance or sleep efficiency. Stage 1 is basically just a transitional phase. This is the point where you lie down, you close your eyes, and you're about to drift off to sleep. You're still very much aware that you are awake. Your breathing starts to slow, and you'll be drifting in and out of consciousness. From this period, you would move into stages 1 and 2, where we spend the majority of our nights. Roughly, we should be spending 40 to 50% of our night in light sleep, which is stages 1 and 2. In terms of characteristics of what's happening in the body here, breathing and heart rate begins to slow. And again, if we're using any sleep tracking data, as we'll go on to speak about later, such as an Oura Ring or some sort of HRV kit, you'll be able to see the change in physiology here. Arguably the most important stage of sleep is your deep sleep. This is your stage 3 and 4. This is also termed slow wave sleep, especially for the athlete. As we'll go on to see, it becomes very important that we get enough deep sleep. On average, we should be aiming for 15 to 20%. However, in terms of our 24-hour lifestyles, bombarded with technology, unfortunately, deep sleep that takes the biggest hit, and the majority of the population are sitting close to 5 to 10% of a given night in deep sleep. One of the main reasons this becomes very important when we're talking about the athletes is the body releases the majority of its HGH, its human growth hormone, for the muscle growth and repair. There's the immune system in itself is strengthened, and there's new studies to suggest that the lymphatic clearance in the brain is at its highest during deep sleep. And in the final stage of sleep, there's stage 5 sleep, REM sleep, rapid eye movement, is the restoration of the brain and your mental capacity. So brain revitalization. This is also the stage where dreaming occurs and protein synthesis peaks. We tend to spend roughly 10 to 15% in REM. I'd like to bring your attention to that little graph at the right of the screen right now. We won't spend too much time on this right now. That's actually my Oura Ring data from the night before. Thankfully, I had a good night of sleep to showcase. But what I'd like to showcase on this display is that the REM sleep, sorry, not the REM, the deep sleep is in the first third of the night. That becomes very important when we're looking at sleep efficiency and recovery for the next day. Because deep sleep is such a slow wave state, if we have a deep sleep later into the night, closer to the point that you're going to wake up, you're going to suffer from feeling lethargic and having low energy in the morning. And again, this comes into sleep efficiency. The last thing I'll say on the sleep cycle here is each stage is seen as a gear. Think of a manual gearbox in a car. The gear shift to shift through these gears efficiently is melatonin. So if we suppress melatonin through behavioral traits, diet, it makes it a lot harder to shift through these stages. Again, we'll see that as we go on through the slides. Next slide, please. just one more, I think, Ian. Lovely. So before we go on to speak about the importance of sleep in regards to physical performance, I think it's fair to cover the importance of sleep in regards to general well-being and health. And before we look at that data there, I'd like to read out a quote that stuck with me in a book, Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. And it reads, "Amazing breakthrough. Scientists have discovered a revolutionary new treatment that makes you live longer. It enhances your memory and makes you more creative. It makes you look more attractive. It keeps you slim and lowers food cravings. It protects you from cancer and dementia. It wards off the cold and the flu. It lowers your risk of heart attacks and stroke, not to mention diabetes. You'll even feel happier, less depressed, and less anxious. Are you interested?" I think we'd all be interested in something like that. Thankfully, it's not a magic pill that we all need to run to Holland and Barrett's for. It's obviously referring to a good night's worth of sleep. So for both athletes and non-athletes, sleep is definitely essential for almost every disease state in the body. And that study displayed on the screen there by the Centre of Disease Control and Prevention perfectly encapsulates the fact that short sleep, and over there they've put short sleep as anything below 7 hours, increases the risk of almost all cases of health abnormalities, whether that be cardiovascular, psychological, metabolic. Low sleep increases your risk. Next slide, please. Okay, so you might be thinking, why have I got a picture of the glymphatic system on a sleep lecture? So this was actually a very interesting find for me, and it's one of the main reasons I kept it in the presentation. So the glymphatic system, firstly, is the central nervous system's analog to the lymphatic system. So it's a macroscopic waste clearance system. But what's interesting about this clearance system is that it's primarily disengaged during wakefulness. So currently, with us all sat here using our brain power, the glymphatic clearance is disengaged. But during natural sleep, levels of norepinephrine decline, which allows the expansion of the brain's extracellular space. So if you look at the diagram there, you can see the cerebrospinal fluid influx at the left side where we're in a sleep state. And this is because there's a decreased resistance to fluid flow as norepinephrine decreases. But why is this important when we're asleep? Mainly because this influx primarily happens during slow wave sleep. So that's our stage 4 deep sleep. As I mentioned at the start, unfortunately for the majority of the population, whether that's athletes or non-athletes, we're not getting sufficient deep sleep. So we're cutting out on that, where we should be aiming for 20%. We're actually getting closer to 5%. This can lead to an impaired glymphatic clearance, which has been linked to many neurodegenerative diseases, primarily Alzheimer's. Reduced glymphatic clearance leads to an amyloid beta and tau protein aggregation, which is the main cause of Alzheimer's disease. So I think it's fair to say that sleep plays an important role in the prevention of Alzheimer's disease. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think that's enough. I just wanted to emphasize the fact that sleep is important in terms of general health and well-being, which I think everyone would have known, but it's always nice to reiterate that. Moving on to the impact of sleep deprivation in athletes and athletic performance now, which is quite an interesting section. So next slide, please. Okay, so this study by Tahiri and Arabameri looked at the impact of sleep deprivation on reaction time in the morning after a single night of sleep deprivation. They looked at 18 male college athletes that were studied in 2 different groups. They were also measured for peak power, as well as mean power and reaction time. We're just going to focus on the reaction time here because I thought the outcome or the conclusion on this was pretty astonishing. Primarily that it was found that a single night of sleep deprivation resulted in a reduction in reaction time by up to 300% in the participants of the study. It was also shown that reaction time was reduced to the same amount as being legally intoxicated on that test day. Next slide, please. So another study by Rayner et al. Looked at accuracy and speed. This was really interesting primarily because they also included in the study sleep deprivation with a stimulant. So in this case, they had used a caffeinated drink. Looking at the graph there, you can see you've got your normal group, restricted sleep with caffeine and restricted with no caffeine. And it appears that in both studies, whether that was restricted with or without caffeine, there was on average a third decrease in serving performance, both in men and women across the board. It's very interesting to see that the fact that caffeine, a stimulant, there is generally seen as an ergogenic aid for concentration and alertness, didn't have an impact in this case. The study did conclude that the caffeine dose was that of a normal coffee, roughly around 80 milligrams. Potentially with a higher dose, these negative impacts could be alleviated. Next slide, please. So without boring you with slides on slides of studies looking at the impact of sleep on performance, I thought I'd leave a list here of the main impacts on performance related to sleep deprivation. There's a reference list if you want to go in and look at each of these individual studies. And I think it's very important to understand that even a single night's worth of sleep deprivation before an athletic event can increase risk of injury or reduce your immune system, causing you to catch a common cold or other diseases a lot more easily. Next slide, please.
Do you want the next slide or just the next point?
I think there's 4 points. She's dropped to the 4th point, I think. Yeah, that's it. I will mention at this point as well, actually, it's quite, we've talked about sleep deprivation. However, there was a study done by the Norwegian Chess Association that looked at chess players and whether there were specific stages of sleep that impacted performance more than others. And the answer was yes, it was primarily deep sleep. So for all the players studied, those that improved their chess rankings the most were seen to have a higher rate of deep sleep and a lower rate of the REM sleep. Next slide, please. Next slide. Just one more click there, Ian. Thank you. So going on to sleep extension. So we've looked at sleep deprivation. Sleep extension isn't a normal sleep period. Sleep extension is actually the act of prolonging rest beyond what a normal sleep cycle would be for an ergogenic benefit. So whether that's to improve mental health, increase motor response, or promote intracellular growth and repair of the muscles, or in an athlete's perspective for reaction time or all the negative effects that we've just seen there. This is a very cool study that looked at finishing times in terms of endurance events and the impact of sleep extension. Looking at the top right graph there, your red lines are your sleep deprived group. Your black lines are the sleep, the normal sleep group, and the green lines are your sleep extension. Across the board, it was saying that the group that had roughly 90 minutes of sleep extension, which is quite interesting that it's 90 minutes. One full cycle of sleep is roughly a 90-minute cycle. Compared to the normal sleep group, showed a 3% improvement in performance. The opposite was seen when the groups were sleep deprived. There was a 3% reduction. There's quite a lot of studies out there looking at the impact of sleep extension. Another one done by Stanford Uni on the men's basketball team had the players sleep for 10 hours, so an extension of 3 hours past their normal sleep routine, and they also found several positive outcomes. The players ran faster in both half-court and full-court sprints. Their shooting improved by at least 9% on average, and for both free throws and three-point shots, the athletes also reported improved physical and mental well-being markers after the game due to the sleep extension. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting all the science out of the way now in the research studies, let's look more at the practicality of what we can actually do to improve the sleep hygiene of athletes and prevent all those negative health consequences, performance decrements that we've just seen. Next slide, please. Okay, so before we move on, the acronym that I use with all my clients is BED. Nice and easy. BED, you think of sleep. But these to me are the three foundational pillars of an efficient sleep strategy that allows you to cycle through the stages and get the sleep that you need. So in terms of behavior, certain things like no-text 90 is something I'd advise a client, and that's trying to get them away from that habit of blue light exposure at the night, a digital detox, primarily due to the melatonin suppression. Behaviors also include an evening routine that support relaxation. So we want to influence a shift from sympathetic nervous system into parasympathetic. Some of the stuff that you might be doing is behavioral traits at night could be yoga and Epsom salt bath, reading, or just popping on a candle and connecting with family and friends away from technology. Environmental cues that we could be using as a big one is decluttering the sleep environment. Your sleep environment should be a sleep haven, or your bedroom should be a sleep haven, I should say. Clutter around the room keeps the mind busy, and there's research to suggest a clean room helps you fall into deeper stages of sleep compared to a cluttered room. Diet, moving on to that, there's definitely a lot of people in this call that are a lot more experienced in the nutrition side than me. But on the diet, I'll basically just comment on do's and don'ts. So to promote deep sleep, you want to stay away from alcohol within the last 3 hours on the run up to sleep, spicy foods, caffeine, sugar, basically anything that's going to give your digestion a lot more work. You want to keep the blood out of the digestive tract and allow the body to go into a state of parasympathetic rest and relaxation. There are always there's certain foods that you can eat to support melatonin secretion and increase your likelihood of falling into deep sleep. But we'll go through more of a structured strategy on the next slide. Next slide, please. So how to build a sleep strategy. So this is the overview I would use with any clients. Also might use something different. For this for me has worked very well, sitting face to face, one-on-one with a client. I would always start with some form of data. I've personally got experience with Aura rings, which I've actually got on right now. That's all sleep trainer. First beat analysis, which I've just started using with clients, but also something as simple as a sleep diary to give to the clients. And we'll see one of my sleep diaries as we move through the screens. Once I've got that data collection, it's making sure that there's routine in place. And by routine, I mean that there's a morning and evening routine that's focused on getting the body prepared for a good night of sleep, or in the next morning, you'll see that a good night of sleep actually starts the day before. Nutrition, like I mentioned there are certain foods, and we'll touch upon a few of them, that actually influence melatonin secretion and can prevent the cortisol spikes. And we'll go on to talk about specific tools. In terms of supplements, I've got personal experience with sleep nootropics, and I've got my Oura Ring data that we can match up against that in a minute. But we'll go on to looking at sleep data first. Next slide, please. Okay, so HRV trackers or sleep data or technology used to monitor sleep. Quick overview of why you'd want to use it first, and then I can do a bit of a comparison for anyone out there, practitioners that might be interested in using some of this technology. One of the main reasons I would want to use data as my first point of call is you get a better understanding of what's actually happening with the client during that of sleep. The Oura Ring, for me personally, gives you an indication of your body temperature. It shows you movement throughout the night, and whether you've moved through the different stages of sleep. By looking at data, we can see exactly where we need to focus our attention. If we looked at data and found out that, well, actually this client is getting all of his stage 4 sleep in the last half of the night, well, maybe something's going on in the hours before he falls asleep that's keeping him awake. The lifestyle assessment by First Beat is actually very beneficial as well. And that gives you, it's over 3 days, and that gives you an indication of your stress markers, how often you were in sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system, and how well and restorative your sleep was. Personally, if I was to recommend one of the two, if it was for an individual device for yourself to sleep train yourself and better understand your own body, I would recommend an Oura Ring. It's great. It's got sleep training, guided breathing, but the data itself gives you a lot of indication of what's happening in your body. If it's more from the practitioner side, where you've got clients that you're trying to coach to better understand their body and sleep better, then the First Beat analysis gives you a lot more information in terms of what you can share a client and train them with. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of one of the sleep diaries I use with a client. Unfortunately, it's not filled in because of I was unsure about GDPR and sharing a client's data. So I thought I'd give blank examples. And we won't stop too long on this slide. I'm cautious about the time. But it's another great tool to use. The number one benefit I've seen for clients using a sleep diary is it gets them to take ownership of their sleep early on in the process. So this is well before you would sit down and offer them suggestions on how to make sleep better, but it gets them to start thinking about sleep as a pillar of their performance and something that they actually need to make effort in bettering. Next slide, please. So usually in a clinical setting or a consult setting, once I've got my data collection, I'll look into the chronotype. So we've all got, there's a genetic component to sleep as well. And you might have heard of the terms eveningness and morningness, or night owl and morning lark. There's actually 4 chronotypes within that. I've put a link to a quiz there that actually helps you find your own chronotype. So as much as possible, you want to provide strategies and routines around the individual's own chronotype. This will influence your most creative times throughout the day, times where you should be having a rest, a nap, or particularly times that you should be starting your evening routine and times that you should be waking up in the morning. If a sleep routine is done correctly that matches up with the chronotype, you should be able to fall asleep at the same time every day and wake up the next morning without an alarm, following your circadian rhythm. Unfortunately, It's the eveningness chronotype that I've got the short straw here with the 9 to 5 working lifestyle, but there are ways to work around this. Next slide, please. And then some of the ways to work around this is creating an evening routine. There's a lot of different things that I've dotted around that screen. I don't want you to focus on the individual aspects. It's more so about creating neural associations with wherever you choose in your evening routine to sleep. For example, I've recently started using blue light blocker glasses. The research suggests that they do work in suppressing the impact of blue light, which is your suppressed melatonin. I do agree with that, but there's potentially a placebo effect there as well, with it being new research. However, when I mention neuroassociation to your evening routine, I'm now at a position where every night when I start my evening routine and I pop on my blue light glasses, from that point on, I start to feel sleepiness, the sleep urge. And the only thing I can think there is that there is now a neuroassociation between me popping those glasses on and starting an evening routine. So this is also very important when you're thinking about helping a client get into a state of relaxation early. That evening routine should be focused on pushing that sympathetic nervous system into parasympathetic, rest and digest. It should be all about relaxation, but it shouldn't overwhelm them either. So even if it's just one thing on that evening routine that they do consistent, the important word here is consistency. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is actually a very interesting study. And before we look into the graphs there, it's basically looking at exercise timing and how we can use exercise timing as a strategy to influence better sleep. So this study was done by the Appalachian State University back in 2014. So it has been a while, but the concept still stands. They set out to answer the question whether exercise timing could actually impact the quality of your sleep that night. They had a group PM, and the results were pretty conclusive that the 7 a.m. group had a lot more time spent in deep sleep as well as REM. A lot more time spent in deep sleep with less REM sleep, and their human growth hormone secretion was a lot higher as well. A very interesting find in this paper was that there's on average, a 25% greater drop in blood pressure. And the reason that's interesting is that shows a clear indication that the body is shifting from sympathetic into more of a parasympathetic rest and digest. The study did conclude with morning exercise isn't suited for everyone, but to get these benefits, all you need to do is a minimum of 5 minutes first thing in the morning. And the way this is working, it's called a cortisol reset. So the moment that you wake up, 5 minutes of high intensity exercise or moderate intensity aerobic, up to 40 minutes if you've got a bit more time, provides the body for cortisol reset. It peaks cortisol early in the morning, which then follows a natural curve throughout the rest of the day, creating a sleep urge so that when you get to the night, you're falling to deeper stages of sleep. I just thought that was a very interesting study to add into the practical side that we were looking at there. Next slide, please. Another very underrated concept in terms of when we look at sleep and sleep strategies is the power of the sunlight. So this is going away from morning routine and looking more at what you do first thing in the morning. Sorry, moving from evening routine and looking at what you do in the morning. Just to show the different light intensities there, you can see that on a sunny day outside, your skin's absorbing roughly 30,000 lux. A cloudy day is 15,000 lux, and a brightly lit office is 500 or less than 500, and a complete dark room is 0. So again, our bodies run on the circadian rhythm. One of the things that influences deep sleep and efficient sleep the most is having a large differential throughout the day between your minimum light exposure and your maximum light exposure. All that means is at night, your room should be as dark as possible, as close to pitch black as possible. That's removing all the technology from your room, having blackout curtains to prevent light penetration. And we'll go on to that in a second. But during the day, you want to have as much of a light absorption as early as possible. And the best thing you can do is get outside first thing in the morning. You can match that up with the morning exercise. Again, a very interesting study on how the body absorbs light and how it impacts our circadian rhythm. Cornell University basically done a study to look at the impact of light on sleep. Individual subjects were put in a completely dark room overnight with a single fiber optic light shining behind their knee. The light diameter was roughly the same as a £2 coin. At the end of the study, they found that light alone was enough to disrupt a normal sleep cycle. And that's basically because we've got photoreceptors all over our skin. That light was sending signals to the brain, trying to figure out what time of day it was, causing the cortisol spike and preventing deep sleep. So just to emphasize, it's very important to have that dark room environment or that sleep haven or as close to possible as you can. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about nutrition, and there are a number of things or a number of products and food-based supplements and minerals that you can use to influence sleep. I've popped up two there, primarily the cherry juice or tart cherry juice. To be specific, there's a lot of studies that suggest that tart cherry juice helps you fall into a state of deep sleep. It promotes a normal circadian rhythm and healthy sleep. Top left there, we've got malted milk. That's very much similar to the tart cherry juice. However, just in the next slide there, I'll go on to talking about diet. Oh, sorry, next slide, please. Yeah, so for me, the bigger picture is, yes, there are these individual food groups that you can use to influence sleep or support melatonin. However, we shouldn't be reliant on these individual things. They should be used more. They should be kept in the toolbox of tricks that we have for our sleep, and only used when you know that you're either going to have a period of sleep deprivation and you need to be more efficient and get into deep sleep earlier. It shouldn't be used on a regular basis. We should look at the bigger picture in that if we're focusing on sleep health and hygiene, we should already be focusing on our nutritional health and having a balanced diet to go with that. Next slide, please. I think you'll have maybe like 5 clips. Yeah. Okay. So CRP, controlled recovery period, is just a fancy word for napping. And there's quite a lot of new research looking at the benefit of napping, primarily to support sleep deprivation. So if you had a night of sleep that wasn't great and you looked at your data, you can actually make that up throughout the day by going through periods of controlled recovery. One of the main reasons I call it controlled recovery rather than a nap is the optimum time for this controlled recovery period is under 20 minutes. The reason for that is above 20 minutes, you run the risk of falling into stages 3 and 4 of sleep. Under 20 minutes, you're going to be in stage 1 and 2. As we mentioned at the start, stages 3 and 4, slow wave, deep sleep. If you're woken at that point, you're actually going to feel worse off than when you took that nap. You can, however, change that 20 minutes to a full 90 minutes, which is one full cycle of sleep. Again, after that 90-minute, you'll be waking up at a natural point in your sleep cycle. Looking at the study there, we can see that a nap followed by 4-hour sleep deprivation resulted in a 20-minute nap after 4 hours sleep deprivation resulted in significant improvement physical performance, cognitive performance, fatigue and muscle soreness, basically all across the board, and that pulled up those performance markers. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so there are a lot of different supplements out there, but I only want to talk about one in particular because I've got personal experience with it, and that's nootropics. So nootropics usually related to supplements that help neurocapacity or feelings of awakeness during the morning. And it's just herbal components put into a pill. The one I personally use is in a picture down there, is Motion Nutrition by Unplugged. I've actually got it here because hotels always ruin my sleep a little bit. But again, this is something I would only ever use if I know that I'm going to struggle to get a good night of sleep. The one point I'd like to make here on the two graphs there from my Oura Ring data, you can see that on the right one, that was a total night of sleep of 4 hours and 42 minutes. So if anyone else saw this thinking that you should be getting 8 hours of sleep, you're going to think I had very poor sleep that night. Looking further into the data there, you can see that my deep sleep was actually 34% of that night, which equated to about 1 hour and 36 minutes. That's the same amount of duration I usually get when I'm sleeping for 8 to 9 hours without the supplement. That night, I can't remember whatever was happening. I've known I was going to get a poor night's sleep, and I've taken one of these nootropics, which overall duration has been low, but I've got enough sufficient deep sleep, meaning that the next morning, I'm still going to be fully restored and I'll be able to get on with my day. I'm not saying that this is good long term, but there are these little tools that we can use primarily for athletes that might be traveling for training or have evening training sessions where they just can't having not enough sleep. Then you've got these additional tools that you can use. And I think that's us bang on the 45 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's been quite as good as time as you, Usamah, so well done. Right, so guys, we've got plenty of time to discuss. I think sleep's quite a practical subject, so please fire through questions, and we can get into a nice discussion. While we're waiting for any inputs, I can just start with something. You talked about tracking, and you mentioned the Oura Ring and the First Beat. So in terms of sleep, they're both good, but the Oura Ring is good for just personal monitoring. Is it a little bit easier to use as an individual as opposed to a practitioner?
Yes, definitely is. It comes with quite a nice, neat application. We're probably on a good screen to showcase it right now. You can see in the bottom tab there, you've got your readiness tab, sleep and activity as well. So it's kind of like an all-round activity tracker as well, which I really like. So you don't need to have a Fitbit or an additional device if you wanted to do activity tracking as well. The data that you see is exactly what you see on the screen there. There's nothing too complex. You've got your sleep graphs that explains everything. If I could do a live demo right now, I would be able to show you. If you were to click on any one of those tabs, like awake, REM, light, I'll give you a drop-down information section explaining each one of those cycles in layman's terms, what you should be aiming for, and some practical strategies of what you could try the next night to influence it a little bit better. The First Beat report is definitely a lot more complex and would require, for the layman, would definitely require a practitioner there with them to explain that report back to them.
And you talked about the sympathetic, parasympathetic balance. Does the likes of Oura provide that? Is it obvious? As First Beat's quite obvious with the color changes in the graphs.
Yeah, so again, because Oura Ring is more so marketed for the lay person, they do have HRV. The ring looks at your HRV data. It's more a graph that it gives you, and it gives you just a neat figure that's called HRV balance, and it will say that your balance was optimal, good, poor, or needs work. So it kind of gives you just more of an indication where it was sitting. Obviously, if it's popping back at poor, you can make the judgment that that just means it's been sitting more in a sympathetic zone rather than parasympathetic.
Thanks for that. Okay, from Corel, what would you advise to someone who wakes up at night rather than having trouble falling asleep? So yeah, that's a good question.
So I've actually had this, and I think everyone will have had this at some point, where you wake at the middle of the night. From my own personal experience and what I've done with clients, the best thing that I could suggest is, if you've woke at night and you can't fall asleep in under 5 minutes, get out of bed, get out of that environment. You don't want to create a neural association with not being able to fall asleep. It's a vicious cycle. So if it's been over 5 minutes, get out of bed and do something relaxing, whether that's sit down with a lamp on. If there is a lamp, use a warmer color and read a book. Read that book until you get that sleep urge again, or wherever you're going to do. Don't go back to bed till you've got a sleep urge, and then move back into bed.
That's a good tip. You know, how many of us just lie there and toss and turn and get frustrated?
There is another one. It's
Sorry.
Oh, Carol, do you want to
Yes.
ask another one?
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you for your answer, Usamah. And that's a great answer in terms of addressing the issue on the day and just helping them to be able to go back to sleep. But in terms of midterm, long-term intervention, I often have more clients that don't have a problem to fall asleep because they're usually knackered to go to sleep, but they would wake up, and despite not having caffeine, despite working on, and it's often sometimes a bit of a spinning cycle. So that's what I meant in my question. Sorry.
Okay. So there is actually quite a lot of research that I think that's quite a common issue actually. And the research that I looked into was people that have this extreme urge to sleep but then wake up through the night are potentially already in a sleep deprived state, but during wakefulness, our adenosine increases throughout the day. So our adenosine is basically sleep pressure. The more adenosine that we have, there's a higher urge to sleep. But if you're in a state where you've not had efficient sleep, your urge to sleep will be high, but you won't fall into the stages of deep sleep. So adenosine clears out in light sleep, so stage 1 and 2. So they might be going to sleep, and stage 1 and 2 sleep, adenosine, well, there's adenosine clearance, so the sleep pressure is gone, and that is what could be potentially waking them. So it might be wanting to look into some form of data like this to see what is actually happening in their body. Is their body temperature spiking throughout the night? Is it that they're having late night meals that is causing digestive issues? Are they in pain? But there's a lot of different factors that could be influencing that.
Question from Tracy. I track sleep with my Garmin 945. Have you come across any research yet that this physical device and or the Oura Ring may actually disrupt the quality or the quantity of sleep?
Again, I've not personally used the Garmin, but when I was looking into products, that was actually one of my concerns, and it's one of the main reasons I chose Oura initially, and it was the fact that having something on my wrist for me while I'm sleeping would feel a bit restrictive, and I think I could probably like scratch myself in the face or wherever throughout the night. But for me personally, the Oura Ring hasn't impacted. I don't know if that answers your question, or whether you were looking at more if there was any impact from technology being so close to you, with waves coming out of the technology, or like the Bluetooth signals.
Right, a little bit of both. Thank you. The Garmin, I have trained myself to wear this just in the terms of for science and understanding a little bit more about these things. But when you take it off, it does have, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it or not, but it does have a green light.
Yeah.
That will, come on and off. And so I was just kind of curious. This is something that is a little bit of a nuance, but like for me to wear a ring at night would be worse. I take all my jewelry off at night, and that would be uncomfortable to wear a ring, but I can get by with a watch. So it's kind of one of those things in your research. I just wasn't sure if you'd run across something like that. So thank you. I appreciate that.
No worries. Yeah, and I think it might just come down to personal preferences. Also, I used the first week lifestyle on myself, and that's 2 electrodes. If you know what the machine looks like, or the device looks like, it's 2 electrodes, upper chest and just below the sternum there. That for me throughout the night was actually quite annoying, and it was over 3 nights. The first night my data was pretty bad, mainly because I was moving around and I wasn't comfortable with something rubbing my chest all night.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I think that was an interesting, you sort of bedded in there, Tracy, about the light. So, I mean, obviously all these devices give off electromagnetic radiations. So long-term, Usamah, any thoughts on that?
I think just based on that one study that I actually mentioned, that a light as small as a £2 coin on the back of the knee disrupted the circadian rhythm. So then I think potentially that there could be an impact with these light sources. The way these work in terms of the watches to get heart rate and stuff, it's through photoreceptors in the skin. So again, that could be pulling us out of a normal circadian rhythm.
Okay, anyone else? Who's got a personal case study they want to improve their sleep?
I wish I had done one for myself, because I actually, the original reason I started looking into trackers and then chose the Oura Ring, Ian, with my job 2 years ago, I was traveling a lot, sleeping in hotels, not knowing where I was going to be, on the road for 8 hours, and I was getting really, really poor sleep. And I didn't realize I was getting poor sleep, but it was more so I realized that every morning I was feeling lethargic, low energy, but I was also getting muscle soreness. At the time, I didn't relate it to sleep. Eventually, when I made the change and put these strategies in place, I thought, let's get this ring. That would have been a perfect time for an N-of-1 study of how poor sleep can be changed into normal sleep, even with unfavorable circumstances.
And do you feel you can use some kind of tracking device to improve your patterns and then train yourself to become more mindful of those patterns and not rely on the device later on?
Definitely, and I think I'm actually at that stage now. And I think I mentioned to you when we spoke about Oura before, I used to wake up, first thing I done was look at my data, and it was paralysis by analysis. Sometimes that data would then influence the rest of my day if the data wasn't good. But over time, like you said, I've realized patterns of what my body needs. So there might be times that I'm already, it might be like now where I can feel stress hormone going high and I can physically feel it. I don't need the ring to tell me anymore. The ring's really just there. It's like an afterthought now. And I'll look at the data sometimes, like that study there where I've had low sleep or I've used a nootropic, and that was just intriguing for me to get the data, so I'm not using it as much anymore.
Okay, any last questions, guys? I'm hogging the question space. What's your experience about food timing, like in the evening? You mentioned, you don't want too much in the stomach because it will pull blood flow there.
Personally, again, I try to 3-hour window before starting my evening routine, and it is all related to that digestion period. Again, Oura Ring's actually very good in picking that up as well. If I, for whatever reason, went out, also I don't put my life on hold. So if I've got a friend and someone wants to go out for dinner and I've had an evening meal, the next morning, if I was to look at my Oura Ring data, I can see it took a lot longer for my body temperature to drop to where it should be for sleep. My heart rate stayed elevated throughout the night, and it's not reached the same baseline as usual. Heart rate variability is a lot lower as well. So I think all of these things filter into it, but it's also not to become so precious about not eating late that you ruin other aspects of your life. It's trying to be consistent, but when you do go out and eat late, knowing that it's actually okay to do it once in a while and enjoy that time, because that in itself is his own well-being.
Yeah, I think I'd like to reiterate that point you made there, actually, because I've worked with so many clients who have such a very structured or routined life because they're trying to control their health.
Yeah.
But they might miss out on later meals with family, or the odd glass of wine with a friend, which is off your list for good sleep, but actually might be relaxing for them and help their overall health. So yeah, it's context, as I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
Okay, Martin, I understand circadian rhythm or melatonin/serotonin cycle is being triggered by the levels of UV light hitting the back of the retina. So the suggestion that it can be affected by light on the skin is new/interesting. I'd be interested in any reference material on this. Did you have that? Did you reference that study you mentioned?
That one study that, that put them into darkness with the light, that's referenced on the slides. I'll go through it again at the end of this. I'm pretty sure it should be there. If not, I'll ping it forward.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think we're learning new stuff all the time, and the tracking devices are really new in terms of our scientific evolution. We're just learning at a very rapid rate at the moment.
I've seen ones that I don't actually know what to do, but it's kind of like the best way to describe it is I forgot his name, but the guy that wears a big helmet. It's a device like that you wear overnight, and it's supposed to align your brain waves or support you get into the right brain waves at the right time for certain stages of sleep. But to me, that's going a bit too far.
Yeah, I agree. I think use these devices to get yourself set back into a rhythm. But if we actually look at what health is, I keep coming to that book, The Blue Zones, which is kind of rural populations doing what people have done for millennia, with obviously no fancy devices. Okay, so I think we can round it off there. I want to give you a big thanks, Usamah. I'm really glad your internet held up, and I thought that was really, really interesting.
Thank you. And that's quite a surprise. I'm glad last night, to be as much as I say no blue light, I always love a hotel movie, but my laptop didn't work because of the internet. That's why I got worried about this, but we were all good.
Yeah, it'll go down in 1 minute's time, so you don't get your movie tonight.
That will just crash again. To be fair, I need to run out and find. This is the issue with traveling. I need to run out and find dinner now as well on the island. Luckily, I think we're still in peak season. I've been on the island before on off season, and the restaurants just aren't open. And it's a case of having like a croissant for dinner or something. That's it. You'll see all the nutritionists pop off the call now.
Yeah. I've had a sandwich on the Isle of Arran, so I know your pain.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, we'll go and have a good dinner. Thank you to everyone. Same time, first Wednesday every month. So hopefully you can join us next month. We've got Adam talking about football. Okay. Good night, and thanks for joining.
Thank you. All the best.